Hi everyone, thanks for joining our first ever BSME social season chat. I'm Deborah Joseph, I'm the editor-in-chief of Glamour, and I'm excited today to welcome Facebook and Instagram. I'll introduce you in a second. We're very keen at the BSME to help you pivot to a digital first career, and this is the beginning of those chats where we'll be discussing with different social media platforms every week or every couple of weeks to educate you both for your brands but also for your own personal social media. So today I wanted to welcome Sarah Brown, who's the head of news partnerships for Northern Europe, and Cameron Harmon, who's a strategic partner manager at Facebook. Welcome both of you. Thank you so much for joining. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks for letting us take part.
Very well, thank you. Lovely to virtually see you, at least hear from you all.
Yeah, it's great. So I put a call out to people to find out what they most wanted to know, to help them grow their brands, their magazine brands. But also, you know, there's a lot of freelance journalists out there who are members of the BSME who also want to grow their own personal social media and build a brand on Instagram, build a brand on Facebook. So I was going to split this into two parts and ask you questions for both. So I thought we'd start with Facebook. So as a publisher, we rely hugely on Facebook. Sorry, excuse me. Sorry, I'm still working from home, so there's still a few noises in the background. Luckily not the dog jumping on my laptop as she did last week. So as a publisher, we rely hugely on Facebook for traffic, but a lot of us struggle because it feels like every month or every week the algorithm changes. Sometimes we do brilliantly, sometimes we don't know why, suddenly it falls off a cliff. Can you give us any advice on how the algorithm works, and can you hack the algorithm, or is it just something that happens like the Wizard of Oz behind the magic curtain that we just have to accept as publishers, that our traffic goes up and down accordingly?
So shall I take this one, Sarah? So I think it's one of the really common things that I do in my role is addressing these concerns that publishers might have. You can have a really good week, it's amazing, and then it drops, and it can be hard to really pick up a pattern. And you'd like to look at something obvious, like your posting strategy has changed or something like that. But often there isn't something as obvious as that. So there's a couple of things to think about. So people kind of get very hung up on the algorithm and how the algorithm might change, and that's going to affect things, because we do very, very infrequently have significant algorithm changes. But more likely to happen is that we're going to be looking at different ways of interpreting whether users like the content or not, and trying to understand a little bit more about whether those signals we get are meaningful. So we do quite a bit of work to try and get that right. And the goal there really is to surface more of the content that people like. But most of the time, that's not the challenge. That's not what's really driving any fluctuation in traffic or distribution you might have on Facebook. You've really got to think about yourself as being part of an ecosystem where every single user on Facebook is literally there's thousands of pieces of content that might be relevant for that user on any given day, and they might be doing something different that day. Perhaps if it's Halloween, they're seeing loads of pictures of friends in amazing Halloween costumes, and that might take more of a share of what's in their feed than normal. And things go up and down, and you're part of a competitive ecosystem as well. So if you've got a story on a particular topic, whether it's an awards ceremony, perhaps, lots of other publishers may have that content as well, or creators or other companies, and they're effectively competing for those eyeballs just as you are. And that really changes things. So I'd be less focused on whether we're making any changes structurally to how newsfeed works, and think more about is my content being competitive at getting there? And we've got a lot more tools for that now for you to understand what's going up and down. I can talk about this for hours, but
I'm so sorry, someone at my door. Can you give us some insight into the tools that we could use for that?
Yeah, sure. So there's a pretty new tool out in Creator Studio that enables you to A/B test your posts. So you can say, okay, well, this headline or this image or this caption involved in the content, if I change that, I change the emphasis of it. Perhaps if I name the celebrity rather than the event, for example, would that make a difference? And then what you can actually do is, the tool's really clever at building a control group of people who are only going to see one version of the content, and another group that will see a different version, and it tests it in real time, and you can let the let the tool work out which is the best one to run. So that's, you know, and there's quite a lot of that. Also, there's things like in Creator Studio, particularly around video, you can see whether you're getting a lot of traffic from recommendations. And recommendations, I think, is one of the things that a lot of publishers don't know a huge amount about. So this is the idea that there are people seeing your content because they follow your pages, they've liked it at some point in the past, and then they're going to see the content because they're following you. But there's also one of the things that entertainment does, and I think actually magazine companies benefit from this quite a lot, is they will get additional distributions, new eyeballs, people who don't follow them, for things like pages you might like, or there might be something in Watch where you've seen one video and it recommends another one. These might not be pages you follow. For video, you can see lots of great insights called recommendations in your Insights tab, and that tells you whether you're doing a good job of reaching outside of the normal boundaries of your audience.
I think that's great advice, and I would. The only other thing I would go into it for people on this call is play to your strengths, because we now have more ways than ever to tell stories on Facebook and Instagram, right? You've got link posting, you've also got video, you've got pictures, you've got Facebook Live, you've got live events. Instagram, obviously, you have live, you have reels. It's all about thinking about what piece of content fits best for which product, but also playing to your strengths. I mean, frankly, a lot of you are very, very busy already, right? You don't have time to do 15 different products. Who does? But if you can think about a particular part of one of our platforms that you think you could really explore to your advantage and to your users' advantage or your audience's advantage, that's fantastic. So if it's doing something like covering London Fashion Week and using Instagram Live, because you know that's where the conversation will be, that is a perfect way to draw eyeballs to your brand and by proxy build a whole new audience.
Yeah, actually, just one more thing on that as well. I think the kind of the mixture of different things that you can use. One of the most common things I see publishers do is that they focus very much on link posts, because link posts drive traffic to the website, then you can sell ads against those users. And ultimately that ads and subscriptions and anything on site is really where the money is. But so they just focus on link posts, but actually thinking about a mixture of video, stories, photo posts, particularly, that might have a really low level of effort required for yourself. Have a think about those, because those things do a really good job of engaging your core follower audience. And that effectively works as a pivot to enable you to get access to a much greater audience that could be more sustainable for you.
We discussed the kind of ratio at my work as what the best ratio is between link posts and pictures and video. Is there a golden rule that you'd recommend for the best proportion of each?
Unfortunately, the answer to that is not very helpful. It depends. There's no set pattern. I think what we'd recommend is that you post regularly and then you test and compare. You know, for every brand, then there's going to be something different about your audience, and they may want to be very happy to see 100 stories from you a day on links. They may be happy to see 50 photos from you a day, or they may only want 5. And I think it's really testing what is a reliable level. For video, I would say probably, you know, if you're going to be serious about your video strategy, you really want to be thinking about at least sort of half a dozen videos a day to make it meaningful. If you're only doing 1 or 2, you may struggle to get that to scale at any sooner rather than later. But regularity is probably more important than the amounts you send out.
And I think to piggyback off that again, I mean, Cameron made a really good point earlier around how visuals, for example, work very well in the magazine space, because that's what people come to for at the end of the day. So again, it's focusing on something that you know will have impact. I mean, when I worked with Vogue UK, you know, a few years ago, like their picture posts would always do fantastically well because it was strong visuals and that's what people came to you for. So think about, like, you know, what strengths do I have and what do I know my audience want from us, and how can we really take that to the next level? And again, remembering that you just have so many different ways to post, and the more, you know, the algorithm, but more importantly, the user, because it's important to note that the user or your audience, they're the people driving the algorithm at the end of the day, not the other way around. The more consistency we see around that, the more users will get used to seeing your content and the more they'll come back to it. So again, thinking about that piece as well.
How do you drive through the noise? There's so much noise on social media. How, if you're a new brand or if you want to pivot? So for example, on Glamour, we went from a general lifestyle title to beauty first. So we made a very big pivot to go beauty first. And we'd always had a bit of beauty or quite a lot of beauty, but it wasn't beauty first. For other brands who are changing, shaking things up or streamlining their businesses, how do they become the expert on a topic on Facebook?
I mean, first of all, Glamour are responsible for a very, very large dent in my, my finances, thanks to the fantastic beauty recommendations you regularly make. But, so clearly the system works, right? But I think it's a very good example of, how do you make your content unique? And I think there are a couple of things. With a beauty brand, you have the example or the advantage of you have the expertise in-house, and building up your people as your kind of experts in the market can really help you cut through, because they become known as a brand. I mean, I think Stylist has done a fantastic job as this, with people like Billy Battier, who's one of their colleagues. One of their writers is now on Instagram, has a very good presence there. Her personality shines through. She's also a fantastic writer. So I very much am aware that she works for Stylist magazine, which is a tribute to how well she's negotiated that personal brand and the professional brand. So there's something there around building your experts up as well. And there's also, and Cameron, works with a lot of partners and does such a great job of talking about this. And so I am going to throw to you in a minute, Cameron, but it's thinking about with any piece of content, anything you do, whether it's a video, a link post, or a picture, how are you going to draw someone in, and what are you offering that's different? You get an example of something like Teen Vogue in the US, who made a very dramatic shift a few years ago in terms of their content, which many people at the time thought was a terrible idea, but they persevered because they knew their audience and they did their research, and they realized younger people today were keen to talk about activism. They were keen to talk about the meaty issues, and they didn't see that as irreconcilable with, Deborah, to your point, beauty and issues around gender identity, etc. as well. So I think, know that and have the confidence that you do have that expertise in specific areas, and think about how you're planning your content accordingly. And Cameron, I'll pass to you, because I know you've done some great work in this space with our UK partners.
So thank you, Sarah. I think one of the things that's interesting is obviously any social platform is about people ultimately, and it's about those faces at the fore. And I think sometimes it's hard for a brand is a kind of an intangible thing for a lot of people. They may really love Glamour magazine or any of the magazines that they love, but they are, it's a little bit harder for them to feel like they've got that emotional connection with them. Now, one of the things about Instagram, it highlights this beautifully. It's about individuals, and maybe it's thinking a bit more about some of the journalists who are covering this, who they're used to seeing their picture and their byline name, but actually, where possible, trying to see whether they're comfortable getting in front of the camera. So if we're trying to give recommendations on how to start a video on Instagram or on Facebook, typically we say, try and get a face in there in the first couple of seconds, because that makes the big difference. And I think just think about that more broadly about your content. Can you bring some of your talent front and center? Because people ultimately will take the recommendations, whether it's for things that I don't know as well as Sarah, makeup, etc. I just see how much my teenage daughters spend on it. But did they think about the individuals and why they trust that voice and how that influences them? And I think that might be kind of an interesting challenge for magazine brands to think about, how do you bring some of the talent that you've got in-house to the fore and make that really kind of cut through.
Do you think that's just for Instagram, or I'm surprised that you're recommending it for Facebook, because I never think of Facebook as a personality-led platform, whereas obviously Instagram definitely is. Do you really think on Facebook putting forward your team members is a popular thing to do?
Absolutely. I mean, there's this. So I work mostly in news as opposed to into sort of lifestyle magazine kind of work, but even in news where we've got lovely examples where you've got presenters who are regularly presenting, that's what really makes a difference. There's lots of examples. I mean, there's a wonderful example. Channel 4 News did an uncovered documentary on Down syndrome, and they chose a Down syndrome presenter to lead it. And they really feel like, because they had a Down syndrome presenter presenting that piece, that it really made it so much more impactful. Now, I think putting people to the front, that's what people mostly look at on Facebook. They look at other people, friends, etc. Sort of media publishers are a little bit of they're a bit different. I think they're kind of more unusual than they are common to the rest of the experience.
There's a perception that we have for Facebook that it's a slightly older platform. Do you think that's a fair assessment? And we was thinking of Facebook as a slightly older platform and Instagram to be slightly younger.
So I think it's a really common perception that publishers have. And I think it often leads to, well, what is the content that I'm more likely to see on Instagram? It looks like it's younger and fresher and different. But the reality is that the numbers on Facebook are enormous. So if you were to compare any audience size, you probably see the same amount of 18-year-olds in any given market. I mean, I don't know the numbers exactly, but comparable between the two platforms. The reality is that for a lot of organizations is when they try to reach people on Facebook, they present a kind of an older version of themselves because they think it's an older audience. So therefore they attract an older audience. Whereas
Right.
when they go to Instagram, they try and be younger and fresher, whatever that is. It's a long time since I was young and fresh, but they're more likely to do that, which then dictates that they're actually bringing in a younger audience as well. They use it for different things, right? I think there are older people. So on average, of course, the Facebook audience is going to be older because there's old folk like me on it and my dad's on it and all that kind of stuff. But then so are my teenage daughters. So I think you've got to think about how do you get out your own way and the perceptions over what kind of the content.
Yeah, and I think I think he agrees, obviously. I think it's also important to note that there are some, what we would view as being quite hard news brands on Instagram who do incredibly well. Like The Economist has an enormous account on Facebook, for example, because again, they think strategically how they present the content. But on Facebook, I mean, we have a partnerships team, our entertainment team who work with creators on Facebook all the time, because you can build a brand successfully. You have great products like Facebook Live. You can do paid online events. For example, we have products that enable them to monetize, like Stars, for example. It's like a fan payment scheme.
Sorry, what is that? Sorry, I don't know that. What is that?
Oh, Stars. So Stars is like a kind of micropayments system whereby basically people can send you like a little micropayment to Stars. So if you do a Facebook Live, for example, you can actually say, you can also send me stars, so what we call the Stars program, and it's a tiny payment. It's like 0.1% of a cent, but of course it accumulates, and so for creators it's a very valuable free source of income. And in addition, if you're making video content as an individual on Facebook, you can monetize through things like in-stream ads. So when you're thinking about strategies, whether being a creator or whether being a publisher, just note that the audiences you target, don't think about as being younger, older. Think about who your demographic is and how you target it on both platforms as well.
I just think a lovely example of this is in gaming. So gaming partnerships on Facebook is absolutely enormous, and this is everybody from older gamers and young gamers. You've got the instant gaming platform, which is kind of thinking of changing the way people think about gaming, and I think that's kind of a nice example. And I often wonder about whether it used to be more accurate to say that a teenager was like this, X, Y, and Z. This is how they behaved. I wonder whether there's a lot more more commonality between different age groups and demographics than there ever was before. I like to think of myself as young at heart, and I think probably have looked at my behavior on what I look at on TikTok or something else. Probably perhaps is not typical of somebody you think of as kind of a middle-aged man living in suburbia. And I think it's hard to make those parallels. One of my colleagues last week pointed out, actually, sorry, it wasn't a colleague, it was a partner I work with, pointed out that he thinks that a lot of the obsession in his own organization about Instagram and youth audiences is because a lot of the social teams are young and they're on Instagram. And it's just something that they're more firsthand familiar with, whereas they think of their mums and uncles and whatever as being on Facebook. So it's an interesting perception thing.
And Cameron's note earlier about if you're focusing too much on the fact that Facebook is a link traffic driver, Instagram's a nice pretty visual for young people, again, you're ignoring whole potential swathes of an older demographic on Instagram you can target and a younger demographic on Facebook that you might be missing.
You mentioned stylist earlier, but is there anyone else brand-wise, not women's, across the board, men's, women's gaming, is there anyone that you feel is really killing it on Facebook and is doing a brilliant job that you can advise people out there to maybe have a look at and see what they're doing well?
Well, glamour, of course, Deborah. Of course, goes without saying. But also, I mean, you are a good example. I'm not just saying this. You are a good example of somebody who negotiates that personal and glamour brand very well. I think when I was following your fashion week with enormous amounts of envy, I hasten to add, but you strike that right balance, and I think that's a really good example of somebody who knows to ensure that they are promoting their brand and representing their brand, but also providing that kind of insight into their life and experiences as well, and encouraging me to buy lots of beauty products. So there's that. Stylists I've already mentioned. I think my personal view is that I really like the New Yorker on Instagram. It has that great mix of fun through its cartoons, but also does great showcases of its photography, for example, through partnerships with photographers, who of course are invariably on Instagram and have their own very large followings, which can then you nicely can cross-promote and grow your own brand and vice versa. So there's a good thing to think about there, which is partnerships. So thinking about, there's obviously branded content that you can do on Instagram, but there's also thinking about how can we cross-pollinate the great work we're doing with other people with big accounts who might have similar demographics we're interested in targeting and could actually bring us a whole new audience. I think the New Yorker is very smart about how it approaches that. It does big photo galleries with the likes of people like Lindsay Addario, who recently went to Afghanistan, for example, or another gentleman whose name I've forgotten. But again, it's really good cross-pollination. So I think those are kind of two examples off the top of my head, but Cameron, I'm sure you've got many more as well.
So a couple of decades ago, I used to sell classified ads in the back of Cycling Weekly. So perhaps I'm a bit biased. And under lockdown last year, I, much to my wife's disappointment, I turned into a full-blown mammal. But I see a lot of, it's less about the magazine brands themselves, but some of the best content I see on social media around cycling is from many of the traditional cycling media brands, because they understand that audience really well, and it surfaces over time, and they've got access to talent, so they've got access to people who really know these things. The thing about individual creators and people who are just enthusiastic about something, it's just them talking about the thing, whereas I think what magazines have is this access, this unparalleled access to talent, to manufacturers, to whoever it is, to places, and they can kind of get you into places that maybe you haven't seen before. So yeah, a lot of the best stuff I've seen right across anything, whether it's YouTube or TikTok or Instagram or anywhere like that, is often from those magazine brands themselves. And to be actually, maybe perhaps I shouldn't be too blunt on this, but I think there's a lot more that could be done in that area, especially in specialist behaviors, because there is your niche, on the internet, and you love it, and specialist magazine brands are brilliant at talking to that niche audience. And I wonder whether, because there's not necessarily the expectation of driving millions and millions of followers, it's maybe more important to have tens of thousands of real passionate people who really get into and understand what you do. That would be my thought.
Where do Facebook groups fit into this, into the ecosystem of brands on Facebook? What would, a few years ago, there was a massive push for them. We did them on Glamour. I know a lot of other brands did them. What's your view on that now in terms of growing an audience? How do you do it? How do you set one up, and how do you grow an audience quickly?
So groups are, so my feed personally, my Facebook news feed is almost entirely dominated by groups. I'm always recommending groups to colleagues never-endingly. I really like terrible art in charity shops, is one of my favorites. There's also the lighter side of science. Anyway, and if you want top tips on Star Wars groups, do let me know. So
not paid for this, by the way. He's not getting a cut of any commission from advertising.
Well, I make a small sideline. So groups, but the massive challenge with groups is that they're not yours. You don't own them. So if you start a group, I think one of the challenges is that publishers have tried to treat groups like pages. It's their broadcast opportunity. And that's not really what groups are about. Groups are about the community that's in that group, and about them feeling like it's a safe space for them sharing content. And ideally, you want to get to a point where you've got massive advocates for your brand or for that particular passion point who effectively take the group over for you, and you can just turn them into moderators of the group, and then you're off. The challenge with that is you're relinquishing a little bit of control and a sense of brand. The second part is it's hard work. You've got to be actively engaged in that community, and it's not just, you've already done a lot of work to produce great content. Do you then want to have to do a lot of work in starting a conversation and moderating chat and groups? Groups can sometimes run away from you. I think there's good examples of local politics groups kind of being overrun by Brexit chat and those kind of things. So you've got to be thinking about, well, how do I maintain that as a safe space for the kind of discussion I want to have? And that's quite hard.
You need to commit one person really to manage the group.
I think so. And also it's got to be somebody who feels like they can let go a little bit and look for those people who are regularly making a real valuable contribution to the group and see whether they can get them to contribute more.
So actually, we do find with our Glamour groups that people can't wait to tell on other people, so they almost self-regulate themselves. It's hilarious.
Really?
If anyone says the wrong thing, we're very quickly told by another member that then it's not appropriate, which is great because it helps us regulate it.
And if you can do that, it's lovely. The recent group I got involved in was Grace and Perry art fan club or something. I can't remember what it's called now, but So you've got users submitting their own piece of art that they've done. So it's obviously quite, makes them quite vulnerable putting their art out into the world. So the community kind of jumps on people who's any negative or just unhelpful, and that's quite good. So I would think about those things. But if you can get it right, this is, it is. We've talked quite a lot in the past about meaningful social interactions on Facebook being important. On groups, it's supercharged. This is really high levels of interaction. These people get to know each other, and it can be really informative. And to give you an example of the impact, there was a national tabloid that I was working with last year who happened to get a bit of a scoop on a PS5 launch. So they did an article on it, pretty small. It wasn't an awful lot about it, but it got picked up by gaming groups in Facebook, and they were driving 5 million clicks a day to their content on that traffic.
From the Facebook group?
Yes.
Wow, that's amazing.
And it wasn't their group either. It was other groups that were doing it.
Right.
So I think also you don't necessarily need to run a group. Maybe find groups that align really well with your brand, and maybe you can give them access to events, content, material. Maybe that's a nice route as well.
You can cross post as well. Yeah.
And I think again, it's thinking about, where's the need for a group? I mean, one smart thing that a publisher I work with did is that they realized that this is back in 2016, 17. They realized that the posts that got the most engagement on their website were about Brexit. So they started up a Brexit group. And it was so successful. And actually, I think we wrote a case study on it. It was so successful that everyone opened a Brexit group with extremely varying degrees of success, because the market became very crowded, and because what this publisher had done is they've been very smart. To Cameron's point, they'd put very firm parameters in place. You can put rules and that you have to adhere to be part of the group. They screened who went in, and they kept the conversation, and they nominated people to be moderators, allowed to self-moderate. So I think thinking about what content is consistently the most engaged on your platforms and on your own website, because that could be giving you a signal people want to have that conversation. Refinery 29, for example, did a group, the Money Diaries.
Yes, which is brilliant.
Which is superb. And we actually had someone from there present back when we could do these things called in-person events. And, hopefully soon we'll do that again. And she said, we did our work. We didn't just open it to see what happened. We did our research. We saw there was a need. That group now has something like 15,000 members. So do your research and think about what your audience wants to engage with. Absolutely.
I've got a question here. How much should brands cross publish across Facebook and Instagram the same content, or should you create different content for the different platforms? Because obviously you've got the option to just push from Instagram to Facebook or Facebook to Instagram, but is that best practice? And Cameron, I'd be intrigued. My personal view on this, speaking as a former social media editor back in the day, you do need some form of customization just because they're different platforms. Instagram is just more visual at the end of the day. So, if you're not, Facebook is too, important to know. And with any social platform, you should be really thinking about, what Cameron's been working with broadcast partners, and you think about the open, right? How, you've got to be able to grab people in those first few seconds. And I also think that, you've got to think about, if I'm going to make the most amount of impact on something like Instagram, maybe it needs to be shorter, snappier, and it consumed in such a way that it doesn't need audio, because that's just how people can scroll in feed, for example. Facebook, again, slightly different. Think about how you're cutting it, and even think about the format of the content. I mean, when I worked at CNN back a million years ago, when we posted on Facebook, I would have written a very different caption for a Facebook post than I might have done for an Instagram post, just because I knew the audience was different, and again, user analytics. But I also knew that the way I wanted to sell the story was very different. So I might have done it more straight on Facebook, whereas Instagram, I might pull something different from the story and use that to promote it. So that being said, I'm very conscious that all participants here today are extremely busy people, and that's not always practical. So sometimes it might be a case of just picking one and going, okay, which one do I know this can have the most impact on, and posting there accordingly. But that's probably more of a personal view than anything else. But Cam, let me know what you think too.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would say, in the absence of real good evidence, I think about posting the same content to both. You might find that it's hard. I just find predicting whether something will work or not is really hard.
Yeah, it is.
One top tip is, if you're making stories for Instagram, then always cross-post to Facebook stories. And actually, if you're going to do stories on both, create it in Instagram, because the tools are better.
Right. And
cross-posting is easier.
Facebook that way rather than the other way around.
Yeah.
Cool. I just wanted to say, if anyone's got any questions, because I'm going to move on to Instagram now, if anyone's got any questions for Facebook that I've not asked, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I will ask towards the end, because we're going to do a Q&A at the end. Okay, so I wanted to move on to Instagram. So one of the big questions that I'm often asked is it too late for people to set up an Instagram account? Is it too late to grow it? It feels like people miss the moment if they're not on it already. Or
absolutely not, absolutely not. And I'm not saying that because, you know, we have some massive target that Cameron and I won't hit, and you know, be out on our ear. No, I'm saying that because, you know, are we a big Instagram? We say we are one big happy apps family. Is Instagram a big platform? Absolutely. Is there always a thirst for new, exciting, original ways of storytelling and reaching new audiences? 100%. You see new brands entering the market all the time, and if they have smart strategies, they will do well. The trick is not to just kind of fling something at it and see what happens. You've really got to build a strategy. So we talked before about doing research. So what do you know people engage with on your existing platforms, for example? What topics, what visuals, what stories, what people, for example, if you have several different reporters and journalists in your stable, you know, who do people seem interested in? Because it may well be that somebody could be the face of your upcoming Instagram account. And then there's also what we were talking about before is, I know some people are interested in building their personal brand. Again, think about what would be your unique part that you're bringing to the table. What would you do that's a bit different? There's a great example of a journalist called Jessica Yellen in the US. I think she's either ABC or NBC News, and she left and set up as an independent journalist. And what she did was she would go live every day on Instagram to discuss the news story of the day. And it got to the point where people knew that she was going to do it. And she just developed a following as a result. And she now has an enormous following on Instagram because she found a niche that she thought helped. There's another independent journalist on Instagram called Alex Beard. And she does a daily roundup of news stories, although she didn't do one yesterday because she was tired. I'll let her off. And I love it because it's a fantastic news snapshot of the day, but she also brings kind of her own spin to it, and she always does an amusing kicker, and I love it. And those kickers, there's often ones that I share on my own stories, for example. So she's really thought about how her brand can work on Instagram. So, you know, no, it's not too late. It's never too late. It's thinking strategically. If you are part of a larger stable, if your magazine is part, so for example, you know, your Glamours or your Condos, your Hearst of the world, and you're thinking about opening new accounts and things like that, get your sisters and brother publications to cross promote you. Use newsletters to cross promote you. Use your own, you know, print editions to promote you. Think of the holistic picture, not just your social, but your digital and even your print and even your kind of traditional as well. Cameron, over to you.
Can I just one question on that front?
Yeah, sure.
A few, we don't do it, but I've seen a lot of other brands do. If you're a brand and you've got one main Instagram account, what's your thinking on setting up kind of smaller ones? So focusing on a smaller topic and setting up maybe 2 or 3 other Instagram accounts that might focus on a specific topic, basically, that you don't want to incorporate into your general Instagram. What's the thoughts on that?
Cam, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think it depends on how much time. So they're only worth doing if you can do it well.
Yeah.
Naturally, you know, I think, you know, magazine publishers are experts at managing a portfolio of brands that are in the same area, right? That's how many businesses have grown. I think so it naturally lends to having similar, you know, profiles. I think it's just a question of what are you going to deliver for that audience that they wouldn't see through the main profile, and what you're trying to do. Are you going to be happy with a smaller audience? You may find that you can attract a completely new audience who maybe isn't necessarily interested in the main brand, but is interested in, I don't know, whatever, music or fashion or whatever the angle is.
I think one that a lot of people do, for example, and I think I was just trying to look on my own Instagram, but I think New Yorker has a New Yorker photo desk or New Yorker photo. They have like the separate, because again, they've obviously seen that the content from that stable, that part of their magazine, does incredibly well on their Instagram account. So again, it's a signal from their audience that spin-off actually could be worthwhile from that. So that's another thing to think about. New York Times has this cooking section, for example. So I think sometimes, again, if your audience is consistently engaging on certain content, that's probably a good sign. But Cameron's point is a really good one. Only do it if you feel there's added value and if you have time.
There's a great case study from Reach that we published with how they grew Instagram and how they grew their Instagram. and for a lot of their regional brands. So we'll make sure everybody's got a link to that. But it's got really good advice on how to think about it and how to manage your own business to be able to have the right kind of output to generate results. And these are from a standing start in many cases.
A lot of journalists I know are starting to wanting to set up a business on Instagram. I think more and more people are starting to do that on the side, you know, with a multi-hyphen career. What advice can you give to people of, you know, selling on Instagram? It's becoming a much bigger conversation now. I don't know much about it. I'd love to hear any tips you've got.
I will take this one, but I would perhaps Sarah knows a lot more about this than I do, but because we work in the nature of our role is we don't necessarily work that much in shopping or e-commerce, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
There is some quite good supporting materials for that we can we'd love to point in direction. But I think, and the same applies actually to Facebook as well, as if you're building a business on either of those platforms, what I would say is that if you're using ads and you're only using your own money to promote these things, really, you know, learn how to use the systems before you start spending money. So a really common thing, for example, on I don't know what the equivalent is, perhaps it's the equivalent on Instagram, but the boosting post approach to Facebook. That's fine. It's really easy. It's low effort, but it's not as efficient as going into App Manager and creating settings that cap your spend and cap your spend at a unit price and do all those things. So especially as you're growing a business, you may have some investment. You can feel like that might burn. You might burn through that very fast unless you kind of really control and measure how you're growing. And then also, if you've got great people and profiles that have got high volumes, talk to them about how they can promote what you're doing as well. And obviously that if you can do that, then you're stratospheric very quickly if you're very lucky and well connected.
I mean, influencer outreach is definitely, I mean, going back to earlier on about wanting to grow, influencer outreach is to me just seems the most clear organic way of growing.
Yeah,
definitely. And if you know them and you can make a connection with them, we've also got our brand collaboration manager product that's really perfect for Instagram to connect people with brands with creators who've got good volumes, and so we can share more information on that. It might take a while for a new business to get to the point where they can get access to that. Would be
the only thing I would add to that is we're going to send you the world's longest email after everything.
I was going to say out there, if there's references here that you don't know what they're talking about, because I don't know it all either, don't worry, we're going to be sending out every single link and piece of information that's referenced here. Will be anyone listening will get a follow-up email with all of that, so don't worry about that.
100%. And I think we also we certainly do for Facebook, we also do online courses on so many issues that we've mentioned today, and I believe there could be one on Instagram and e-commerce, so we'll make sure there's a link there. But Cameron's advice is spot on. I think the only thing I would add to it really is just, again, know your audience. Like, what are they most likely to be interested in before you start that, building up something that you might end up not really having a focus for, and then be strategic about how you're reaching out to people in a bid to promote it.
Cool. There's a question here. Someone from Luminaire, a new personal shopping platform with curated editorial and Instagram. It's a really important channel for us to portray both our editorial stories and the unique products that our team can source. Sarah, you mentioned playing to our strengths in terms of prioritizing the many elements and tools within Instagram. Could you share any insights into the most effective tools for inspiring users to shop? I think you just mentioned some, Cameron, but don't know if there's any more you can mention, or should you wait for the toolkit that's coming?
I won't wait for the toolkit, and I think the main advice again is don't do the kind of spray and pray approach. We just try and do everything and see what works. Just be, look at who in your audience is responding to stuff, how are they responding, and what's the most popular. That's a really good way. So don't push things that they're clearly not interested in, because you're just wasting your time. But if there's clearly a buzz around something, go for it. And you can be smart and strategic, like they clearly like X, let's see if we can push that, but also be mindful that at some point interest will drop off, and then how can you pivot that? But again, we'll make sure you have the tools and the interest in that. Cameron, is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, that sounds good.
I was trying to read your body language out the corner of my eye, sorry.
talking and pivoting, you came out about a month ago saying that Instagram focus is going to be on video. Can you talk us through a little bit about that and how as publishers we can really benefit on focusing on video?
I think I'll kick off on this one. I think the first thing around the Instagram and video is that you now have multiple ways to tell stories on Instagram through the medium of video, right? You have, of course, stories. You have now Instagram Live, and you have, of course, Reels. The challenge can be, which one do I use for which part? And sometimes, again, I'm very mindful of your time. You might not have time to explore all three of these. So again, sometimes just looking at your editorial calendar or looking at your strategy and thinking, well, what would be the most useful of these tools for which particular story that we want to tell or piece we want to publish? I mentioned London Fashion Week earlier, or New York Fashion Week, or Paris Fashion Week. A medium like Instagram Live, which is real time, and when people want instant, like how was the the Molly, what's her name? Was it Molly Goddard? Did the amazing dresses?
Yeah.
Yep, thank you. Still got it. How was the Molly Goddard show? Real-time responses, maybe even bring in somebody from her team or somebody else, an expert in your stable who can take responses. Then there's kind of, are you thinking more strategically ahead? Are you planning, for example, a series on mental health around women, or, issues, around, makeup increasingly is starting to finally address women of color. That probably would lend itself more to something like stories or reels, because you might be able to plan slightly more ahead for it, but still maintain that area of spontaneity as well. So I think it's the type of product on Instagram for the type of content and the type of story that you're wanting to tell. That would be my first port of call. The other thing as well that is so great is that you can do all of it just on this. I do recommend getting yourself a gimbal, the little stands that you can use so you don't have some poor person standing there with a shaking camera phone. The dreaded selfie sticks can be very useful because, again, it's ending that air of authenticity to a story that you might be telling. They're very lightweight, they don't cost a lot, and they're good ways to get yourself used to telling stories. And I think that the last thing I'll say before I pass the camera is don't forget the social media. And Deborah, you made this very, very good point earlier, is that social media is a two-way street. You do have to bring in your audience on that journey. So when you're doing a live, making sure you're incorporating comments. When you're doing reels, looking at how people are responding, and same with stories as well. And if they're interested in certain pieces of content, think about how you can bring more of that content to them as well.
Okay, down to the last couple of questions. I've had a couple of questions about Facebook news. How is it working, and should editors be lobbying publishers to get on it? If not, any answers there? Much appreciated. A few editors here who are struggling to lobby their publishers correctly.
So it's a couple of things. So Facebook News in the UK is hitting our internal expectations, which is good. So everything's kind of going in the right direction. Still very small, though, as a proportion of overall traffic going to media publishers. Naturally so, we wanted to make sure that we built something that had a nice steady growth path. Then, whoa, this has gone crazy. Oh, now it's broken. Let's come back. And then that kind of more staggered path of growth that you often see with some of our products as we iterate fast. So if you're not getting a lot of traffic from Facebook News today, don't panic. You're not missed the boat. The second thing is, how do you get in there? If your page is registered on the news page index, content you post to Facebook will be included in Facebook News. So that's an important thing to recognize. It may also be selected as a top story, which is the article at the top, if you have, if you've posted it to Facebook and you're part of the news page index.
Have you two got to run off because we're getting a few more questions now? Are you in a rush? We've got 5 more minutes. Okay.
Yeah, totally fine.
Okay. We've got a couple more coming in now. Okay, so one of the questions is there much research on the impact of promotional but inorganic posts versus editorial content on long-term reach? And do you have any suggestions on how to balance this where there are internal demands?
This is a really interesting one. So I worked with a partner in the last 6 months where they've got, I think in the example of it, they've got millions of followers on Facebook, just absolute millions, 5-6 million followers. But their average post was only reaching tens of thousands. And so they had this idea that there was this dormant population. So organically, they're going to struggle to reach that dormant population, because unless the people who are reaching are then connecting with people who are then connecting with people who already follow the page, and then that's reinvigorating that, the likelihood is that those pages are not going to compete to be in their newsfeed. So spending a bit of money trying to target their existing audience was quite an interesting impact for them. And they built out control groups and they targeted existing users to reignite those people. The reality is, if you've been on Facebook for 12 years and you've got 10 million followers, a lot of those people may not be on Facebook anymore.
Oh, 100%. We were, it was before I was there, but Glamour was very, very early to Facebook. And we also faced this problem, like what about the early adopters who might not be on it anymore or are dormant? How do you address that? And I think that's actually something that legacy publishers all suffer with, actually.
Definitely. There's two things that I hear every single time I have a meeting with the salesperson. So the sales team know more about this stuff than I do, but I've been in quite a few meetings with them. Two things that they always say is, one is be careful not to over target. I think people get the idea because you can target on Facebook that you should, but by being broader and let your content you do the targeting rather than using specific targeting tools. So that's number one, because that will enable your spend to go more broader. But the second thing is as well is try and avoid anything that's too easy in action. So in terms of spend versus organic, think about something that will give you an idea that this is a longer term user. So can you optimize for people registering on your website as opposed to just landing and just trying to drive clicks? So avoid click-through based campaigns, because that's going to be quite short term, and you're going to reach a lot of people who love clicking on stuff. There's still people who love just clicking on anything, and you want to get a more meaning. It's better to get a harder action that's more meaningful and more expensive, potentially, than something that's nice and easy and too transient.
That's interesting. So maybe a survey or something like that people actually have to spend time to do it.
And I think also absolutely. And you don't have to have a wildly sophisticated strategy if you're just starting out on that, paid journey. We have enormous partners who literally just will see a story that they've seen done particularly well on Facebook and be like, okay, we can give that an added boost because we know it's been popular content, or a piece of content, evergreen content that can be boosted at the weekend, and people are more likely to want a long read. So, it goes back to that kind of reading the audience and thinking about what they're likely to do can just really help you kind of just start on that journey. And again, I'm pretty sure we have a course for this. And we also just last week launched a course around marketing on Facebook, which is available. It's in a partnership with the I believe it's the Oxford Business School. I will add that to the email.
Yes,
that'd be
which
amazing.
at this rate is going to be 25 pages.
I know, but
I'm terribly sorry.
Sarah, this is why we've got you here, because we want, it's just amazing as journalists. Obviously, we dig deep, we research, and so many journalists I know just don't know where to find this information. And I know it's out there, and I know you publish it, but it's not always easy to know where to find it.
100%.
So that's why this is incredibly helpful.
Of course, and we think about that a lot too, because we're always thinking about how can we better target yourselves with the content that you need. So for example, a few years ago when we launched a couple of online courses, we did look to make sure that we were sending this to the right people. But an event like this is perfect, because I promise you we're not setting you homework. There will be a test later. They will actually just be able to kind of go through, just pick what's most useful for you. Don't feel you have to do all of it. Again, it's all about being selective about your strategy and what works best for you.
Cool. And there was one last question which I now can't find. Hang on, where is it? It was on what's the best time? I think it was Instagram Reels versus stories. Again, we're finding stories aren't working as well for us. I don't know if there's been a shift in algorithm. I know we're all obsessed with the algorithm, but we have seen a repressed response to our Instagram stories. Is there an advice to shift more towards Reels or Instagram stories? Is there any insight there that you could share?
I think it'd be interesting to understand what has changed in terms of stories, because stories is definitely growing. So it might be that it's a competitive ecosystem issue where there are more people doing better with stories, which means it's harder to make yours higher ranked. One quote just from a news broadcaster I've been working with, they do a tremendous job with this thing called so ITV News do this thing called The Rundown, which for me is one of the best bits of how to deliver news to a young audience using stories. They've started experimenting with Reels because as far as they're concerned, they described it as, probably misquoting them now, it's like it's like supercharged stories. I may have used some other analogy, think about it now. But so what they do is, because each individual story is only 15 seconds, so being able to deliver something of that kind of impact in a 60-second slot, and just thinking about the way that people consume content serendipitously, like thinking about how do you give somebody something they were looking for when they didn't know they were looking for it.
Yeah, right.
And I think that seems to be
Love
the key.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I mean, we've gone over a little bit, but I've got another 55 questions I'd like to ask you, but maybe we'll do that next time. Maybe we should do, if there's any interest, maybe we should do an Instagram shopping session specifically about how people can set up businesses and sell on Instagram and Facebook. I don't know what you all think. I'd love to hear from you. Please contact me in the BSME and let me know if that's of any interest. But until then, thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Cameron. It was really, really helpful. I've learned a lot. And thank you to all of you out there. I've had a few personal messages. I know a few friends are listening and finding it really useful and helpful. I'm really pleased to hear that, because that's what we're here for as the BSME. We hope you enjoyed this session. We are going to be going on, if you weren't on earlier on, we are going to be continuing a season of social where we'll be interviewing all the biggest social platforms to get help and insights and advice like we have today. So we've got Pinterest, LinkedIn, TikTok, and I can't remember who else, Twitter. We've got Twitter coming up as well, so please do join us for those. I think actually the Pinterest one is October the 5th if you want to join us. And the social season ends on the 21st of October. I wanted to also tell you all about the BSME Autumn Party, which is hosted at Nolita Social in Knightsbridge. It's our first real life event in over 18 months. So I hope you can join us. I will be there. I'm looking forward to seeing you all. And you can book that at thebsme.com. Go to our website. And lastly, I wanted to thank our partner, Readly, which is a fantastic app where you can access all the different magazines and newspapers you want to read and edit it accordingly. So do have a look. They support the BSME, and without them, we couldn't be doing these brilliant talks. So thanks again, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and hope to see you soon, Sarah and Cameron. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Take care. Bye.